It is no news that the aviation industry is the fastest mode of transportation. A lot of people would also say it's the safest. I am, really inquisitive to find out what this is all about, because I'm sure that to achieve that speed and safety, there are loads of technicalities involved. And in this my inquisitive nature, I welcome you to a lovely time on Executive Discourse, which is always coming to you on the network service of the NTA. My name is Roland. On this week's episode of the program, I am in the home of a man who has done so much in the aviation industry. He is a man who has held one of the most sensitive parastatals in the aviation sector in this country, Nigeria. He is a pilot and, I think I can say he has seen all there is to be seen in terms of aviation. And I'm right here in his house today because he has graciously allowed us to come in here. Hello, Captain.
Morning, evening. How are you, madam?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Very well.
Good to see you after such a long time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Nice to hear.
Thank you. On this week's episode of Executive Discuss, my guest is a pilot. He is a man who, I will say, loves aviation. At one time, he was the managing director of the Nigerian Airspace Management Agency, NAMA. And yes, he made his mark there. Today, he is the CEO of Top Brass Aviation. I'm talking of Captain Roland Iyayi. Hello, Captain. How are you once again?
I'm very well. Thank you very much.
And it's good to see you again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yes. In all of these years that you have fulfilled your passion and you're still fulfilling it, how has it been for you, especially in the Nigerian space?
Well, the thing is, I'm a very restless person. So I think it got to a point where boredom set in. Flying actually could be interesting, and yet it could be extremely boring because half the times you're not really doing much beyond managing systems in an aircraft. But a lot of people get fascinated because the airplane is in the air most of the time.
Yes.
It's like, how do you do this, But the truth is, flying is all by numbers, and it could be boring if you're kind of restless, like I am. I always wanted more, and that was actually one of the reasons I decided, okay, look, I'm going to go into more of the academic end of aviation, which is what I've pursued, particularly in the last decade. Basically, I see the industry beyond just flying the machines, moving from point A to B, to be driven by policies. And I see policies as a fundamental bedrock for a viable or a sustainable aviation industry. Unfortunately, today, we do not have those
Policies
those policies that would drive growth and ultimately the economy of Nigeria. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I think that borders on the fact that a lot of people do not understand what actions, the consequences of actions will be. And that is what policy does. When you institute a policy, it should actually tell you, if you look at it well enough, if it's well-rounded, it should tell you what you'd expect. But where you have unintended outcomes with a policy, then it tells you something is not right. Then there's a call for review, or you should review, and then see where things can be amended, and then you make progress. That's the way I believe it should be. But unfortunately, we've had a system pretty much about Nigeria, where things get done, and it is done today, and it is left for an eternity without anybody reviewing actions and consequences and stuff like that.
Okay,
so
you know
ultimately
what, Captain Iyayi, I
thing.
know you're quite passionate about aviation policies in Nigeria. We'll talk so much about that, but let's take it progressively.
Right.
Aside your boredom in flying aircraft and all that, at the time you were the managing director of the Nigerian Airspace Management Agency, and a very sensitive, that's a very sensitive parastatal, I must say. What was your experience there like, and what were you able to bring to bear at that time on the industry?
Quite interesting period for me. It was like being thrown in the deep end, really. When you fly, you understand there are systems and infrastructure on the ground that helps to keep you flying. But my being the MD of NAMA exposed me to the nitty-gritty of how that infrastructure is actually put together. And, coupled with the experience, from flying and all that, I was able to now understand, in a different way, how things can be done differently to achieve the same purpose and even better. So, from a Nigerian perspective, NAMA is a mini Nigeria. All the politics you see in Nigeria actually take place in NAMA. Yeah.
How do you mean?
Look, there's so many things that we see in Nigeria today. I grew up in an era where quota system was driven as a norm. And that was because there was a need to balance, inequalities in different parts of the country. But that has today been extended to all the different facets of government. And that's a problem I believe we would ultimately have to deal with. In NAMA, what I met was a skewed organization, heavily indebted. The running costs were way beyond what you consider a norm for an organization that was looking at growth. I recall the recurrent expenditure on an annual basis of about 77% of our budget.
Recurrent expenditure?
Absolutely. So that left you with about 20% in terms of expanding the infrastructure, renewing the infrastructure. So it was a major task. It was a huge Herculean task, because part of the problem we discovered was most of the things we were done were haphazard. A lot of contracts were awarded for the sake of patronage, and they were not necessarily useful for the purpose of the organization. So a lot of all these things were things that needed to be redressed, and we spent the better part of a year dealing with that to provide the foundation that was necessary to move the organization to the next level. Beyond that, we also, knowing that we had scarcity of paucity of funds, we needed to, reorganize or sort of reinvent the way we procured. So whilst there was need to, buy so many things, there was no money to buy. So what did we do? We now had to, look at options that were viable for the long-term planning for the organization. So we resorted to finance leases for vehicles, for computers, for all sorts of stuff that the organization needed. And we structured this that we could pay back for almost everything we did within 24 months. The structure was to pay up in 24 months. So what we did was, from a monthly budgetary allocation, I give a classic example. NAMA didn't have vehicles. Shocking to know. There were no vehicles. So we decided, okay, look, what we need to do is let us explore the option of a finance lease to acquire all the vehicles. At the same time, we looked at the possibility of doing the same thing with computers that we needed for office work and stuff like that. And yes, we succeeded in doing that. We were able to buy about 60 vehicles in one fell swoop. And incidentally, you'll be shocked to know, before then, NAMA was spending about 7-8 million naira every month on car maintenance.
What cars?
Dead 504s and the rest of them. So these are vehicles that are being used They would probably work 2 days and then be in the mechanics workshop for another week or something like that. We walked through the entire process of needs, not wants,
Yes, needs.
And we're able to establish clearly the priorities, and we took the needs, we went to the minister, late Professor Borishade, who was wonderful in supporting everything we wanted to do. We had that done, and he took it to the president. And the president was very, very, he was like, how come everybody's not doing this? So we're able to not only get what we wanted by virtue, by say a presidential approval, we actually got a commendation for it. So these are things we're able to look at and then be able to achieve by getting all these operational vehicles to mobilize and make sure this sensitive locations were actually up and running 24/7. So it was quite a task, but at least we're able to at least get through with understanding what the problems are, the challenges, and then providing solutions that actually worked.
So you were able to achieve that much with NAMA. Still talking about NAMA, for me, yes, vehicles and all, but more of navigational aids, because while you were the MD of NAMA and I was still covering aviation, I had an opportunity, to visit the tower, the control tower, and I saw how aircraft were being sorted, which will take off, which would not, and all of that. That's a lot of technicality. How well were we prepared for that before you took over the affairs in NAMA? And what were you able to improve upon there?
Incidentally, in 2005, there was a drive to renew the air traffic management equipment systems for the entire country. Obviously, the navigational aids is just one element of the entire infrastructure.
Yes.
You have the radios, you have the radar, you have all that. So basically, it's a huge system. Now, whilst we were there, like I said, there was a proposal that came on board and was actually executed called the Safe Tower Project. The idea of the Safe Tower Project at the time was to renew all the equipment we had in 4 major towers at all the 4 international airports.
Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, and
Kano. Now, those 4 airports, if you look at it, provide between 80 and 85% of the total traffic in Nigeria. Domestic and international. So the focus was on, okay, let's get those 4 sorted first. So we did that. We were able to achieve that in 2 years. The other thing that I met when I got to office was a TRACON project, which was a project that was intended to sort of upgrade our radar system. I was a bit opposed to it because I felt the world had moved on beyond radar. You see, I'm not one of those to believe that you need to go through a particular route everybody else has gone through. If the world has left those routes behind,
why not
and you have a new
get
one.
to the new step?
Exactly. When I came into office, TRACON was on the table, but there were a lot of issues with TRACON. At the time, apparently, we were supposed to have had 4 primary radars. The primary radars are radars that can integrate any aircraft, whether your transponder is on or not. And that's typically used by the military. So that if you enter into an airspace, even if you don't want to be detected because you've turned off your transponder, the primary radar can actually detect you. So we had 4 of those radars as part of a bouquet for the TRACON project. And then of course we had all the others were secondary radars, you know, which obviously is what is used for civil aviation generally. Now, when I came in, somehow the 4 primary radars had been removed from the bouquet, and the contract price had not reduced. So that for me was a red flag, and I felt there was a need to review that. So I called the attention of the minister to say, look, this is where we are with this, and there will be a need to address some of the concerns we have. Part of that project was also to have a sort of a wide area network system, implemented all over the country, such that, wherever you are, you can actually use, Wi-Fi,
Okay.
which basically is also what we use to transmit data. So it was part of that package, but we looked at the cost that was being provided to do the entire nation.
Yes.
It seemed to be very high. So there were a lot of things we threw up. So that necessitated us now going to Paris to have a meeting with the contractors. When we got there, they were told to remove the prime raiders. So we said, okay, look, the government hasn't changed, the scope of the project. So we would rather it was reintroduced. Yes, they said, well, they will reintroduce it, but they wanted to have a variation. I said, no, we would get credit for what it was when it was introduced.
Exactly.
Because we haven't collected it back, we haven't changed anything, so it has to be the same. So we went back and forth on this negotiation for quite some time. And, ultimately, it was, I left office before it was actually executed. But whilst I was in office, I had made the note that if we embraced multilateration, which was the new technology for traffic control, it was going to save us a lot of money.
Okay.
And we would cover the entire country for less than half the cost of Tracon. The argument then by pro-Tracon people was that, oh, where is he used in the world and the rest of them? So I drew the attention of everybody that, look, if you go to Heathrow today, and this was 2005, that multilateration is what is used for ground control. And it is overlaid on the secondary radar. They said, oh no, that it's not what it is we know and all the rest of it. I said, well, look, we even have it in Africa. So we can actually go and see how it works.
How it operates.
So I took a team of the board of NAMA and our ministry officials and our management.
Yes.
We went to Cape Town in South Africa, where multilateration is used till today. By the time they saw how it worked locally, spoke to people and everybody else, they were very impressed. But some voices were still saying that, oh, it's an unproven technology. And I'm like, look, unproven, yet they use it. So again, it tells me about interests, and invariably, it's part of the issues you need to contend with when you're in Nigeria. So I wasn't willing to fight that interest, because the truth of the matter is, the government had executed, contracts for the project. What I thought the government could have done at the time was to review that contract and see how to take the major chunk of that contract that was not useful out of it, and then introduce the multilateration. Incidentally, the same contractor who was pro-Tracon at the time now came back less than a year later to try and acquire the company that was doing the multilateration in South Africa as part of its own group to now sell the product that was unproven.
Again.
So invariably, there was a lot of politics involved.
Oh, goodness.
And that's where we are. So we never got around changing anything with Tracon, but we could have done a lot
better.
For the same money. We're still using Tracon today.
Till today.
Unfortunately, supplies for spares have become an issue. It's a challenge right now. So in some cases, I'm not sure how NAMA is coping with sourcing supplies for spares, but that's a challenge. We manage that. But the major thing we were able to renew as part of the infrastructure for the entire air traffic management system was the Safe Tower project. We brought in new systems that could queue aircraft automatically, that would do all sorts. It was also tied to equipment on the runway and the airfield. So right in the control tower, the controllers could actually see the conditions on the runway effectively, without necessarily having to have somebody relay that to them remotely and all the rest of it. So everything was automated. So for the first time, we were able to achieve a fully automated air traffic management system within the confines of our airspace.
All over Nigeria?
All over Nigeria, particularly the 4 major airports. We're able to achieve that. So yes, it was a major landmark achievement for the management at the time.
Having achieved this, you've flown aircrafts, you've seen how, it is, and you've dealt with policies. Where are we at today? Because I know that, yes, we've always had policy issues in Nigeria. I look at an array of airlines that we have, especially on the domestic scene. We'll come back to the issue of the international. And all of these bilateral agreements, multilateral agreements, we seem not to be making any headway. What exactly is happening?
Unfortunately, with the demise of Nigeria Airways, and of course the deregulation of the industry, it meant having to bring in new players and the rest of it. I think the government of I think it was the Obasanjo government that liquidated Nigeria Airways. I think the government was ill-advised because I was part of a team that reviewed the liabilities and assets of Nigeria Airways. And this was shortly before the late head of state, Abuja, passed on. We had established that with $112 million, Nigeria Airways could have resuscitated 14 aircraft and paid off liabilities and debts that it owed at the time.
$114 million.
$112 million.
$12 million.
Yes. Now, that would have meant all the aircraft in Nigeria Airways fleet, which at the time was about 18, was it 18 or 20, thereabouts, would have been fully operational within a matter of 6 months. That would have meant cleaning up the debts Nigeria Airways owed out of London and some other stations. And that would have put Nigeria Airways on a solid footing for growth. Considering that the major problem Nigeria Airways had at the time was government interference. Everything that went wrong in Nigeria Airways was government. Unfortunately, government will never accept that to be the case. So when Obasanjo came into power, he was advised by a lot of people who were actually angling to benefit from Nigeria Airways.
Nigerian Airways.
Because of what happened ultimately, Nigeria Airways had a lot of subsidiaries. Sakol today is an independent company. It used to be a subsidiary of Nigeria Airways.
Nigerian Airways.
But it's doing very well today. It's been sold off, as a subsidiary. Nigeria Airways had catering with a lot of equipment, producing meals that were served on flights and the rest of it. Nigeria Airways had a printing press. Yes. Nigeria Airways also had a properties company. Now, the properties company alone, when we did the valuation, had more than $250 million then in assets. So the point is, if you have $112 million as what you require to resuscitate, and then you have assets worth over $250 million, it's a no-brainer. But rather than take the course that was being pursued by late Abacha to put Nigeria Airways back on its footing, the Obasanjo presidency was advised to liquidate Nigeria Airways. And indeed, by the time it got liquidated, a lot of staff were not paid what was due them. Even till today, we're still struggling to get payments, the last batch of payments for staff. So when you look at that, it's a very sore and a sour taste in the mouth of every major aviation professional in the country. And that's essentially why today there's a clamor that Nigeria should have a new national carrier. I may not agree with that, but that's besides the point. I think people see it as, for different reasons. We look at it and say, oh, when Nigeria Airways is flying, we know that's Nigeria. It's a pride of a country and all the rest of it. Look, aviation is not pride. There's a lot of economics involved. And if the economics don't do well, if it doesn't sound right, if it's not right, then everything else is wrong. So my belief is Nigeria Airways was the best opportunity to have kept a national carrier. And by now, Nigeria Airways would have been one of the strongest in the entire continent, if only the government will not interfere. Unfortunately, it didn't happen.
Before you go further, because you mentioned government interference. Yes. Now, even if we were able to pay off, our debts, the debts of Nigerian Airways, the liabilities and all of that, how would we have been assured that there won't be any government interference? Perhaps that was why the Obasanjo government felt it a wise decision to liquidate.
No, I don't think so. I mean, incidentally, Nigeria had always been in a military regime prior to that time. The Obasanjo presidency would have given Nigeria Airways the right footing for independence, because with a military regime, orders were given and they were to be obeyed. Irrespective. But in a democratic setting, if the instruments were put there as law, it would be inconceivable for anybody to come along and decide to say, well, we'll do this and do it differently, because the law is there. But in a military regime, everything was done by fear.
You obey the last order.
So the point is, the presidency of Obasanjo was actually the basis to have given Nigeria the right footing for it to be independent. And with that independence, you can actually go out there and source equipment like every major airline will do. Probably will just need national guarantees. I mean, look at Kenya Airways. Kenya doesn't have the sort of resources we have.
We do.
South Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia. So when you look at those countries, and that's why Nigerians are passionate about the fact that we must have a national carrier, because we look at it and say, well, we're the giant of Africa. Therefore, we should be able to do better than these people are doing. But it goes beyond all of that. If the fundamentals are wrong, it is very difficult to make anything right. It's like a foundation is not right, and you're building. It's going to come down.
It's come down.
So the point is, at the time Obasanjo took the liquidated Nigeria Airways, that was the best time we should have clamored for an independent national carrier, not a national carrier. There's a difference in a national carrier and an independent national carrier. Because you see, when you're independent, it means you can take decisions that are economically viable. Nigeria was, at the time, for instance, was made to fly routes that didn't make sense.
Okay,
and we didn't have the right equipment. Routes. No, we didn't have the right equipment to do that either. You can't be taking a 737 that has 120 seats into Ibadan that you can only pick up 5 passengers.
Ibadan?
Yes. Yeah, but we had to do it. Nigerians had to do it. So when you look at all of those things, and this is what government says, and that's why government built all those airports, that every state should have access, which is what airports are meant to be. But again, I mean, because the capacity or the types of aircraft being operated by Nigeria Airways, which incidentally, when all the other airlines came along, they did a similar thing.
Same.
So look at it. Nigeria Airways had a monopoly of the market. Now you have like maybe 10 other airlines coming into the fray. The market automatically becomes fragmented.
Yes.
When it becomes fragmented and you're using the same capacity type of aircraft,
it
is like, an accident waiting to happen, in the sense that airlines will fail.
Definitely.
Because you're all chasing the same market. And if the market is such that it was finite when Nigeria was there, now you have more people coming in to share the same thing, the same finite market.
Yes.
You're not growing the market, because hardly did you have any new airline venture into new routes. Maybe the likes of Overland did a few of that, right? But most airlines are going to where Nigerians went to, and they were going to the major markets, which is why you have Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt as in major markets all the airlines in the country are going to. And that's why there's a distortion in the market size, where you have an aberration rather, where you have 80% of the market, amongst these 3 airports. And then you have 28 airports in the country. So what happens to the 25 others?
To the 25.
So those are issues of policy that could have been addressed. But like I said, the issue of national carrier for me died with Obasanjo regime.
Yes, because we keep talking about enabling environment, and already I'm just taking a flashback at the domestic industry, the domestic airlines.
Yes,
they're not. They're barely, holding their heads above water.
Yes,
as it is presently. Even though it looks like they have their own faults in all of this, but they barely have their heads above water on the domestic scene.
Yes.
If they can barely survive on the domestic scene, how do they want to thrive on the international scene?
Well, again, that might seem a good question to ask, but at the same time, the foundation of that question is, let's go back to where the problem is. You see, there's a root cause. That question is a question of consequence. If we address the root
Action
cause,
and reaction.
you wouldn't have that consequence.
Okay.
Now, the issue is this. When the industry was deregulated, you had all these other players coming to the market. What role did the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority play in ensuring that the deregulation exercise was smooth and to the benefit of a country? Now, this is where policy issues come in. Now, when you deregulate, you're saying anybody can come in. But did you set the criteria for them to come in? So, you had airlines that could barely fly a 19-seater airplane buying 747s. There was no structure locally to support the maintenance of these airplanes, but they were being brought in. Ultimately, when the time became necessary for them to do maintenance, they were flown out of a country. Now, that is what? Capital flight.
Capital flight.
So, did you put a policy in place ab initio to address that as a consequence of deregulation? But let me give us an example, which is one of the things I studied in my master's program at Cranfield. Brazil. Brazil has literally the same structure as Nigeria, almost the same history. Now, Brazil has been ruled by military dictatorships for years, and then of course they become democratic and all the rest of it. But the difference between Brazil and Nigeria is that Brazil encouraged and built a manufacturing base.
So there is no issue of capital flight?
No. In our case, we destroyed a manufacturing base. So, in Brazil, they deregulated because it became a fad all over the world. I mean, different countries are deregulating. Nigeria was one of the first African countries to deregulate. It wasn't because we were ready. It was because that was what was being done.
Follow the trend.
Yes. But if you look at America, right, they were the first to deregulate. The lessons learned from the mistakes of America was taken on board by Europe. When Europe decided to deregulate, they deregulated in 3 phases because they wanted to catch anything that was untoward. I mean, in terms of unintended outcomes. And they used the 3 phases of deregulation to manage that. Now, Brazil, at some point, after deregulating, they had unintended outcomes, just like we have had. But what did they do? They now decided to re-regulate certain elements of the industry for control and structure. By doing that, they were able to manage that growth, which invariably was intended for the economy, not anybody else.
Not anyone else.
Let me give you numbers. I think it was 2004. If I check the numbers again, Brazil had a total of about 18 million people traveling by air. 18 million. Today in Brazil, it's about 120 million. And the population in Brazil is about 220 million.
Goodness.
So what am I trying to say? When it was 18 million, that was when they deregulated. But all of a sudden they realized that they had a lot of unintended outcomes. But they sat down again and reviewed the policy. They re-regulated certain elements of it. And by doing that, they were able to put some structure in place. The traffic growth was phenomenal, even by their own standards. They acknowledged that.
Yeah, because they were doing well.
Exactly. So now we look at it from 18 million to 120 million plus. That is huge. Nigeria has a population of 200 million. So we say. We're not even sure. But the total number of people who fly by air in Nigeria are probably maybe 3 million. But they're repetitive travelers. So at the end of the year, we end up with maybe 18 million people. So, I mean, for somebody like me, for instance, I take an average of a trip a month. So in a year, I would have traveled 12 times. 24. That's 24 flights a year, minimum, domestically. There are a lot of people like me who do even worse. Some people travel twice a week.
Yes.
You know? So when you take all that number put it together, and you factor it for the total number of people total number of passengers in a year, you discover that the people traveling in Nigeria by air are less than 3 million. But if we had the right structure, we would attract nothing less than 20 million people traveling by air. 20 million different people traveling by air. And it is possible. That's why I say there's an issue with policy. If the policymakers understand the scope and they understand what can be achieved, then it is easy to now formulate policies along the lines of what you understand. But if you don't understand it, you can't see it. I'll give you an example. Today, to set up an airline in Nigeria, all I need to do is present a sort of a feasibility report to the NTA, and then all the paperwork I need to put in place to get licenses and all the rest of it. Now, in the course of me doing that, the business plan is supposed to show to the CAA whether or not my project can be viable. But I dare say that I'm not sure that the CAA reviews those studies to critique them well enough to say, well, this is not viable. Why is that? If somebody would prepare a study and say in 3 months he wants to be able to reach a 70% load factor.
In 3 months?
In 3 months. It is not feasible. It is not feasible. Even for an established airline, when you venture into a new route, that route will not do well for at least 6 months.
There's no way it can.
There is no way in your books you can indicate that in 6 months you'll be 70% load factor.
Yes.
It's not possible. But these are the sort of studies I have seen over time presented to the CAA.
And accepted.
And they're accepted, they're approved, and they're licensed.
Goodness.
Now, when people come into the industry and say, oh, airlines are not properly managed, they are failing and all that, the failure started with the CAA. Because if the CAA did its due diligence and did everything right, some airlines will not be in existence. So, if those airlines are not there, the market is what? The market is now there for a number that can satisfy the market.
Satisfy the needs.
Let me go local on the continent and give us a classic example. Ghana.
Okay.
I have a license in Ghana. But when I went to procure a license in Ghana, I was told that I could not be given a scheduled license, meaning that I cannot run a scheduled operation to pick passengers from point A to B. But I can do charters.
Okay. Why?
And the CAA DG explained to me that the Ghanaian market is finite. They have 3 operators, domestic, and they want to keep the 3 operators in that market. If and when one of them fails, they can bring in another person. But they're not going to increase the numbers. Why? Because if they bring in another person, then all of them will fail.
Because they'll be limiting, the patronage.
If they saw that, it means that they took time to study their market.
To study the market.
I dare say we didn't do that in Nigeria. We haven't done it in Nigeria. Even till now, we haven't. Because if you ask for the recent traffic data from the Airports Authority or from the CAA or from NAMA, you don't get a consistent number. NAMA will give you something different from the CAA. CAA will give you something different from the Airports Authority. It shouldn't be the case. It should be harmonized. But if you want to plan to set up an airline, that's what you look for. So if the basis of your planning is already defective, the planning can be solid. So ultimately, it's bound to fail at some point.
Yeah, it's set out
because
to fail.
certain assumptions that you would have taken ab initio will be wrong.
Will be faulty. All right, Captain Roland, we've talked so much about the Nigerian aviation industry and your experiences over the years. I think I actually need to get to the home front to find out who the Captain Roland Iyayi that I know is on the home front, to see how I can strike a balance between the two.
Well, I'm very poor on the home front anyway, mind you. Because,
don't try to get out of this now. Don't set the tone for that. Let me meet the members of the family. Let's introduce the members of the family to our viewing public, and then, they make up their minds about that.
I'll describe my dad as a very nice man of his word. He has integrity and he understands me and he's always there when I need him. Well, he's away for a few months because he's very busy and he has to make money.
A very nice person, and he likes to share. He gives to the poor. Yeah, like the Bible says, give and get. So yeah, that's what he does.
I feel my dad's career is very time consuming, but he's always happy about what he does, and that makes me happy. So as long as he's happy with what he does. He has influenced my decisions and choice of my career because of how he treats people and how kind he is to people and how he helps them. So I've also always wanted to become a surgeon to help people.
As an individual, I would say he's very principled, he's focused, and he's a man of integrity. And he's also a very generous person. He goes out of his way to help anyone, regardless of who it is. He's very passionate. I have also, been in the aviation industry, so I understand where his passion is coming from. And I do encourage him because I think it's something he loves. And to take that from him is like taking, taking that from him is like taking everything from him. He has always been aviation. That's what he knows, and he does it well. He's very professional about it, and he's good at what he does. He's a very positive person. So that's one thing I know he has more or less rubbed off on me. He sees the best, he sees in every situation, Roland always sees the best in every situation.
Okay, yes, you've seen the members of the family, and I must say that you've got those lovely twins there.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Before we took that break, we were talking about the sustainability, the survival of a lot of these airlines that we find in the Nigerian aviation industry today. And I want us to come to what is operational today. We do not have any Nigerian airline. Okay, maybe one or two, because I think Air Peace now is operating some international routes. How do we get to sustain the momentum? How does the Nigerian state get to support them so that they can actually play on a level field out there?
Thank you very much. In most countries, even in America, they have policies that says fly American. In Ethiopia, you can't be in government and fly any other airline.
Except Ethiopian.
Except Ethiopian. Except, of course, Ethiopian is not going, on that route.
That route.
You cannot fly any other airline. So you say charity begins at home. So the first thing the government will do, because if you look at the travel of the Nigerian government personnel, the travel budget in a year that is given to foreign airlines is huge. Now, most civil servants in Abuja have to travel out of, travel on courses, on training, whatever it is. They fly foreign. If you have sort of a national carrier or a flag carrier, I say at this point, the policy should be there, not just policy now. A law should be put to say you must fly Nigerian.
That particular.
So where you have 2, 3 flag carriers, the law must insist that you fly them. One of them. We start from there. Because now, if you as a civil servant is flying on a local airline internationally, you would now want them to improve because you will take an interest.
Yes.
You now want to know what they need to improve. Now, being in government gives you that possibility or the access to be able to say, look, I flew Air Peace yesterday. This was what they talked about. I think we can do this to make it better.
To make it better.
Because now you have experienced it firsthand. So that is the implication of a policy where you say you must fly Nigeria.
Nigeria.
That will now make sure that that travel budget held by all the parastatals, all the government agencies,
goes to that
goes to the
airline,
national flag carriers.
Captain Iyayi, we can go on and on.
Unfortunately.
Yes, about all these issues with the Nigerian aviation industry, and we wouldn't, we wouldn't have scratched the surface because there's just so much. What is Top Brass Aviation all about doing now?
Top Brass, actually, I set it up as a charter company, and we actually got into the oil and gas sector, because I felt I'm not going to get into a market where I'm speculating. Scheduled service is a speculative market. You are hoping that you get there on the day and there will be passengers.
There will be passengers.
But when you do charters,
you're sure.
In my case, it was a contract charter.
Okay.
Whether the aircraft gets used or not, I get paid because it's a dedicated fleet for a particular contract.
Yes.
So that's what I did, and then I expanded into acquiring some business jets, hawkers for charters.
Okay.
But ultimately, for the same reason I believe things have not worked out well, I've sold 2 aircraft already. And the reason is very simple. In the charter market, there's what you call the gray market. As a licensed airline operator, charter operator, you're required to pay the CAA 5% of your gross earnings. I do not believe and agree that that should be the case, but that is what the law says. Because if you take 5% of an airline's earnings, that's the profit. Because airlines are not 5% not profitable. But somebody in the wisdom of within the CAA or in government had the wisdom to say, okay, look, to make sure that the industry is funded, the CAA is funded, we'll take 5% of your charter sales charge. For airlines, it's 5% ticket sales charge. I have a problem with that. We'll come to that. So when I had this issue of having to worry about what you're paying and all the rest of it, and you have a gray market to contend with. The gray market are aircraft owned by private individuals being used for charter. They don't pay anything in terms of taxes.
Okay, that's true.
To the NCAA.
That's
they're
true.
Not licensed. As far as the NCAA is concerned, they're private owners and they're flying their aircraft.
Yes.
Nobody does anything in terms
Any
of
form of
checks to establish what is going on. So you find that where you, to cover your costs, will charge $6,000 for a charter per hour. The gray market will charge $4,500 or $5,000. And the man who wants to pay for charter, realizing he's saving at least $1,000 an hour, would rather that than yours. Now, for a charter operator, if you do not fly 40 to 50 hours on your aircraft per month, you can't break even. So when you're flying 20 hours, 25 hours, your fixed costs are the same. So ultimately, you find yourself subsidizing your business.
Yes.
Because you're running at a loss. So what is the essence of, belonging to the Joneses when it is your pocket is getting empty? So it got to a point where a decision had to be taken. Do you chase or you fix? I decided to fix, and my fix was, look, this airplane is no longer, serving its purpose, because if the gray market is getting what I'm supposed to be getting, and the CA is not, in any way, helping to manage my situation, then I have no business being in there. So that was one of the reasons I moved out of there. But what Top Brass is trying to do right now, I'm trying to restructure the operations to focus on some niche markets. Some of them I've discussed with you, because I believe there's a huge potential in growing the tourism base in Nigeria. And I want to be able to work in that sector, particularly, open up the hinterlands. Part of the things I'm doing is talking to some traditional rulers to see how we can have access to land in their domain to open up airstrips. Not airports, airstrips. And we can fly into those airstrips because those cities, those towns actually have some, major historical value in terms of tourism. So that itself is a sort of that's a driver for the business model I'm trying to evolve for Top Brass.
Always an ever busy man. Thank you. Yes, from what I've known of you over the years. And that brings me to ask you, how do you relax?
I do a lot of work, yes. My relaxation really, you saw me playing Scrabble. I do that on my phone now, on the go, basically to just unwind and help the brain stay alert. Typically, I travel and just spend time with the family on a vacation and annual basis, try and do that. And then, because my job also involves a lot of travel, I try to find time when I'm out to just ease up and, take some hours off, literally, travel, enjoy the scenery. But for forms of relaxation for me, I do a lot of reading. I do a lot of writing. It's still work, but it's also part of what I do every day.
Part of what you do to relax. Finally, Captain Roland Iyayi, you've, as I said earlier, seen perhaps all there is to see about aviation, and you're still very passionate about the industry. We know where we are presently, and we know that we can be miles ahead of where we are. I want you to speak to Nigerians, the government and the people alike, on how we can make this industry better, because just like I said in my introduction, it's the fastest and ought to be the safest form of transportation.
It's actually the safest form of transportation because, what is safe is driven by data. And that data shows that for every 100,000 hours of flying, you get one incident. That's a lot of time flying, and that's really safe. If you get on the road today, I'm sure there have been accidents all over the place. So again, I leave that to the experts. No, for me, I believe there's tremendous scope in this sector. Government hasn't even seen 10% of the potential of the sector. There's so many things that I believe government can derive with the right policies. So I would suggest that government should take time to actually review the policies, the extant policies in aviation. And how do you do that? I believe government should drive its policy in the sector with an objective. What does the government want to achieve? And how does it want to set out to achieve it? When that is defined by government, then you can now come back and say, okay, how can this industry add value to that objective? So government should ask itself what it wants to achieve. How does it want to go about achieving it? When that is set and it's clear, then we can set policies that will drive that objective. We have never done that in Nigeria. I'm sorry. Because everything I see is haphazard. We actually take knee-jerk reactions to things that have happened, whereas we should determine what should happen. That's where policies that are driven by a focus make the difference. So I think that government needs to review. Infrastructure, we're not anywhere close to it. But this idea that government has to provide everything should change. It's not the matter of government providing. Government should just provide the environment that would allow those things to thrive, and then allow entrepreneurs to drive those things. And it should cut across everything, infrastructure, because right now we're talking about so many things that should be done. The resources government has, right, is not adequate to address all those things. So you cannot stretch yourself thin and achieve nothing. So the consumers over time will come to expect, and they should expect, that with the policies that will drive the industry being put on the right perspective and the overall objective of government driving these policies, then we can expect some sort of harmonization that would show ultimately in their day-to-day lives. Why? Because when things are done properly, the quality of life improves.
Thank you very much, Captain Roland Iyayi. It's been a splendid time with you today on Executive Discourse.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate you coming over.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Indeed, if the government puts in the right policies, identifies what should be done, and gets it done properly, it will improve the quality of lives of Nigerians. And of course, Nigerians will also be positively receptive towards these policies. That is what I'm taking away from my conversation today with the former Managing Director, Nigerian Airspace Management Agency, a pilot, and presently CEO of Top Brass Aviation, Captain Roland Iyayi. I do hope you've learned a thing or two, especially about the Nigerian aviation industry and how it operates. That's the size of our package this week on Executive Discuss. Let's do this again same time next week on the network service of the NTA. I remain Ololade Adeniji Adele. Bye-bye.